Hannah and Mark had once been the picture of devotion, until the woman who spent 5 years caring for her paralyzed husband uncovered a secret life so twisted it nearly cost her everything, including her life. Hannah and Mark met at a college campus mixer in the fall of 2007. She was studying to be a nurse and he was a math major with a quiet charm and a warm smile. Their connection was instant, and what started as casual study sessions quickly became something more. By the time they graduated, they had already made plans to build a life together. They got married in a small ceremony attended by friends, family, and professors who had watched their relationship blossom over the years. They settled in a small town in Oregon, where Mark got a job as a high school math teacher, and Hannah began working at a nearby hospital. Life was simple but good. They bought a modest 3-bedroom home on a tree-lined street where neighbors greeted each other by name and left holiday cookies on each other's porches. The couple became known for their kindness. Hannah was the type of person who would stop and help someone struggling with groceries, while Mark often stayed after class to help struggling students. They attended community events together, hosted game nights, and volunteered at a local animal shelter on weekends. To everyone who knew them, they were not just a couple. They were a team. The routine they had built was comforting. Every morning, Mark would kiss Hannah goodbye as she headed off for her 12-hour hospital shift. In the evenings, she'd return home to find Mark grading papers or prepping his lessons for the next day. They would make dinner together, talk about their days, and occasionally share a glass of wine on the porch as the sun set behind the hills. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was one rooted in love, trust, and stability. They were happy, or at least they believed they were. That happiness was shattered one foggy March morning. Mark had taken up cycling as a hobby, something to keep him active and relieve stress. He left early that day, planning to ride a few miles before school started, but just a mile from their home, while crossing an intersection, a drunk driver in an SUV ran a red light and hit him at full speed. The impact sent Mark flying over the hood of the vehicle. Witnesses said he landed headfirst on the curb and didn't move. Hannah got the call while she was at work. The words traumatic spinal injury didn't fully register until she arrived at the hospital and saw him, broken, bruised, and unconscious. The next few weeks were a blur of surgeries, ICU visits, and sleepless nights in hospital waiting rooms. When he finally woke up, the doctors delivered the news. Mark would never walk again. The accident had severed his spinal cord below the T10 vertebrae, paralyzing him from the waist down. Hannah didn't cry in front of him. She remained strong, even as her world fell apart. She took a leave of absence from work and threw herself into learning everything she could about spinal cord injuries. She learned how to transfer him safely from bed to wheelchair, how to manage his medications, how to prevent bed sores, and how to operate medical equipment she had never expected to use in her own home. She transformed their house, installing ramps, widening doorways, and converting the downstairs office into a fully accessible bedroom and bathroom. For the first year after the accident, life was almost unbearable. Mark went through deep bouts of depression, isolating himself from everyone. Hannah became his full-time caregiver. She bathed him, fed him, helped him use the toilet, and stayed up with him during the long, painful nights when phantom pains made sleep impossible. There were no more date nights, no more porch-side glasses of wine. The woman who had once saved lives in a busy emergency room now spent her days changing catheters and pushing a wheelchair through tight hallways. But she didn't complain. Not once. People in the neighborhood called her an angel. Her friends told her they admired her strength, her loyalty. Even the nurses she used to work with came by with meals and words of encouragement. Mark seemed grateful, if distant. He didn't talk much anymore. The trauma had changed him. He was no longer the confident man who used to teach math with energy and joy. He was quiet, withdrawn, and at times angry. Despite the challenges, they kept going. Over time, Mark learned to manage some tasks on his own. He started using voice-to-text software to write blog posts and reconnected with old students online. Hannah slowly returned to part-time work, but only during the day so she could be home in the evenings. Every spare moment was still dedicated to Mark's care. She believed that love meant sacrifice, and this was simply what life had handed them. To anyone on the outside, it was a touching story of commitment in the face of tragedy. But under the surface, something had begun to shift. While Hannah devoted herself entirely to Mark's well-being, she failed to notice how distant he had become, not just physically but emotionally. There were signs, small at first: a glance that lingered too long on his phone screen, an unusually short temper, a sudden interest in privacy despite having little personal space. But she ignored them. After all they had been through together, she couldn't imagine that the man she had stayed with, cared for, would ever betray her. She was wrong. Mark spent most of his days in the same recliner by the living room window, a spot that offered a view of the quiet street outside and the occasional passerby walking a dog or jogging in the evening light. His days were predictable. He read the news, watched documentaries, and listened to podcasts. At least that's what Hannah believed. She had returned to part-time work at a local clinic, leaving early in the morning and returning just after sunset. In her absence, she assumed Mark passed the time in peaceful solitude. What she didn't know was that something darker had started to grow in the hours when she wasn't at home. With more privacy than ever before, Mark turned to the internet to fill the emotional void he felt but never acknowledged. He started innocently, scrolling through forums, watching old lectures, and commenting on YouTube videos. But that soon shifted. He began exploring chat rooms and message boards tailored to people seeking anonymous conversations. Using a burner email account and a false name, he created an online profile. He presented himself as Nathan, a successful, single entrepreneur in his 30s who loved sailing, traveling, and fitness. He uploaded photos, none of them real, and began weaving stories about his adventurous lifestyle. The response was immediate. Strangers flocked to his profile, drawn to his charm and wit. It gave him a rush he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about attention. It was control, power, and escape from the limitations of his real life. Mark started spending hours crafting the perfect responses, learning the interests of the women he chatted with, tailoring his lies to suit their personalities. Every conversation gave him more confidence. It wasn't long before he met Erica, a 32-year-old administrative assistant from a nearby town who had recently gone through a breakup. She was kind, vulnerable, and exactly the kind of person Mark could manipulate. He told her he had been in a long-term relationship that ended because his partner couldn't handle his fast-paced lifestyle. He said he had recently recovered from a sports injury and was spending time resting while he considered his next business move. Erica, charmed by his confidence and the vulnerability he pretended to show, opened up to him. They spoke every day. First it was through messages, then voice calls, and finally video chats, always carefully staged so that nothing of his true environment could be seen. He wore nice shirts, used filters, and positioned the camera to hide the wheelchair. When Erica asked why he was always sitting down, he joked that he preferred working from a lounge chair. She laughed and never questioned it. After weeks of talking, Mark convinced Erica to meet in person. He told Hannah he wasn't feeling well and asked her to pick up a new prescription across town. Once she left, he rushed to prepare. He had memorized the layout of the living room to move himself short distances without arousing suspicion. He propped himself up on the couch, hid the wheelchair behind the curtains, and dimmed the lights to create a romantic setting. When Erica arrived, she was greeted by the man she believed she knew, a charming, intelligent, and sensitive bachelor with a mysterious past. What was supposed to be a one-time meeting turned into something more. Erica began visiting regularly. Mark always ensured Hannah would be gone, picking up supplies, visiting her sister, or volunteering at the animal shelter. Each time Erica came over, he maintained the illusion. He told her the house was a rental, explained the medical equipment in the spare room as belonging to a friend who had stayed with him during recovery, and made excuses for why he couldn't take her upstairs or out in public. She accepted his answers without hesitation. As their secret meetings continued, Mark grew bolder. He started ordering gifts online, perfume, jewelry, expensive chocolates, and sending them to Erica using money from the joint account he shared with Hannah. He justified it to himself. After all, he was stuck at home, limited by a body that betrayed him. He deserved some happiness. He convinced himself that Hannah wouldn't notice, or if she did, that she'd blame it on a billing mistake or think it was something for the house, but she didn't notice, at least not at first. Hannah was exhausted. Between work, errands, and caring for Mark, she barely had time to sit down, let alone pore over credit card statements. And Mark, careful as he was, kept his secrets buried deep within the walls of his carefully constructed lies. Online, he was still active, chatting with other women under different aliases, keeping track of which story he had told to whom. It was a full-time performance, and he played the role to perfection. Still, it wasn't completely flawless. There were small cracks in the facade, stray receipts, unusual smells, vague answers, and sudden demands for privacy that hadn't existed before. But each time Hannah sensed something was off, she pushed it aside. She reminded herself that Mark had been through trauma, that he needed space, and that she owed him patience after everything they had endured. What she didn't realize was that while she was devoting her life to taking care of him, Mark was investing every ounce of his energy into deceiving her. The man who had once wept in her arms after learning he'd never walk again was now leading a double life, seducing strangers with lies and spending her hard-earned money to fuel his secret fantasy. The home they had built together, filled with years of memories and quiet love, had become the stage for a betrayal she never imagined possible. And with each passing day, the truth was inching closer to the surface, waiting for the moment it would finally shatter everything. It started with a text message, one that seemed completely out of place. Hannah was in the break room of the clinic, sipping lukewarm coffee and catching her breath between patients when her phone buzzed. The number was unknown. No message, just a photo. She tapped it open, expecting maybe a spam ad or a wrong number. What she saw instead made her freeze. The image showed Mark sitting on their couch, laughing. Next to him was a woman Hannah had never seen before, leaning in close, her hand resting on his shoulder. They were mid-kiss, not a friendly peck, but something intimate and familiar. And they were in her house. At first she told herself it had to be old, a misunderstanding, maybe a cruel joke, but the furniture, the curtains, even the book lying on the coffee table, it was all exactly as she left it that morning. The timestamp showed it had been taken only hours earlier, right around the time she had run an errand at Mark's request. Her stomach dropped. She didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, she acted normal, watching him closely that evening as he told her about his back pain and asked her to warm up the heating pad. His expression was unreadable. There was no sign of guilt, no hesitation in his voice. He kissed her good night like he always did, then rolled into the bedroom and shut the door. She sat alone in the living room, staring at the photo on her phone, the silence around her suddenly suffocating. The next day, she bought a small camera disguised as a smoke detector and installed it in the corner of the living room. She told Mark it was an upgrade for home security, something she was doing for peace of mind. He didn't object. That night she lay awake, every creak in the floorboard sounding like a betrayal. Her thoughts raced through a list of possibilities, but none of them prepared her for what the footage revealed. Within 3 days, she had her answer. Hannah sat alone at her desk watching the recorded video as her heart pounded in her chest. There was the woman again, Erica, though she didn't know her name yet, entering through the front door with a key. Mark wheeled himself quickly out of the hallway, standing up with difficulty and bracing himself on the couch. He had always insisted he couldn't walk at all. But here he was, pulling himself upright and carefully maneuvering to make it appear like he was only slightly unsteady. It was clumsy, but he did it. Then came the laughter, the kisses, the glass of wine he poured for her using the same bottle Hannah had picked up the week before. They sat close, holding hands, talking for hours. Erica played with the edge of his shirt. Mark stroked her hair. They kissed again, this time more intensely, as if they'd done it many times before. The woman eventually left, and Mark carefully returned to his wheelchair, putting everything back exactly as it was, like nothing had ever happened. Hannah watched in horror. Everything she had sacrificed, every moment she had wiped his tears, helped him to the bathroom, fed him, carried his pain, none of it mattered. He had created a second life inside the same walls they had once shared so lovingly. But she wasn't ready to go to the police yet. She needed more. She hired a private investigator. A retired detective named Shelley came highly recommended. She was discreet, efficient, and within days had started pulling threads from Mark's hidden life. What she uncovered was worse than Hannah had imagined. Mark wasn't just seeing Erica. He had 3 other women he communicated with regularly under different identities. Each believed he was single, successful, and physically healthy. One thought he was a software engineer. Another believed he was an artist recovering from a knee surgery. All of it was fabricated. He used fake photos, created new email addresses, and had multiple prepaid phones stored in a locked drawer in the bedroom. He made excuses to keep them from coming over too often, rotating their visits during times he knew Hannah would be away. He even told one of the women that he lived with his sister, who was overly protective and didn't approve of his relationships. Hannah realized he had painted her into some vague character in his web of lies. The financial trail was just as twisted. Mark had drained nearly $6,000 from their joint savings account over the past 8 months, little by little, just under the radar. He bought gifts, paid for Uber rides, and even booked a weekend cabin getaway with Erica under a false name. Hannah found receipts, hidden credit card statements, and strange purchases she had once brushed off. It all made sense now. One night, while Hannah was going through the latest files Shelley had sent over, she came across a document that stopped her cold. It was a recently signed life insurance policy taken out in her name, listing Erica as the sole beneficiary. The signature was forged. She stared at the paper, numb as the final puzzle piece slid into place. This wasn't just cheating. It was something far more sinister. She thought back over the past year, Mark's sudden interest in finances, the questions he asked about her schedule, his insistence that she drive certain roads at night. Had he been planning something beyond betrayal? Something irreversible? Her hands trembled as she closed the folder. The man she had once trusted with her life might have been willing to take it. She had her proof now, and she was done waiting. Hannah didn't cry. Not at first. There was too much to do, too much to process, and too many moving parts to allow her emotions to take over. She moved with a quiet intensity, documenting everything. Dates, screenshots, camera footage, bank statements. Every piece of evidence she collected felt like another nail in the coffin of the man she had once loved. She knew confronting Mark face to face would lead nowhere. He would deny, deflect, or manipulate her like he had done so many others. She needed to outmaneuver him, not argue with him. While Mark continued living his double life, unaware of the trap slowly tightening around him, Hannah went to work behind the scenes. The private investigator, Shelley, had already verified the forged life insurance policy. The company that issued it had accepted the paperwork without ever contacting Hannah, thanks to forged documents that Mark had sent in digitally. Shelley found out that Erica had been added as the beneficiary only 2 weeks before Hannah received the anonymous photo on her phone. Whether Erica knew about it or not was still unclear, but it was enough to raise serious red flags. Hannah's first stop was an attorney. She didn't want revenge, she wanted protection. Legal guidance, power of attorney revocation, financial separation, and most importantly, safety measures in case Mark's actions escalated. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman with a sharp tone, immediately flagged the forged insurance policy as potential criminal fraud. She contacted law enforcement on Hannah's behalf. A detective from the Financial Crimes Division agreed to review the evidence. It took less than a week for them to open a case. As the investigation quietly unfolded, Hannah kept up appearances. She woke up early, made Mark's breakfast, and asked how he was feeling. She acted as if nothing had changed, though everything inside her had shifted. She was living with a stranger now, one who was capable of lying with ease and forging her name for money. Every time she saw him scroll on his phone or laugh at a message, she felt a cold wave pass over her, but she didn't let it show. The key to taking him down was patience. Behind closed doors, the police were gathering their own evidence. They issued subpoenas for Mark's emails, cross-referenced the forged insurance documents with the digital signature, and traced the IP addresses linked to his various online identities. The story that unfolded was bigger than a single affair. It was a pattern: multiple women, multiple lies, and thousands of dollars spent under false pretenses. Even more disturbing, Mark had started pressuring one of the women to invest in a startup business he claimed to be launching, asking for wire transfers to an account he controlled. It was a textbook case of romance fraud. The authorities needed one more piece to move forward: a formal statement from Erica. If she could confirm that she was unaware of the marriage or the insurance policy, the case would escalate from financial misconduct to criminal fraud and conspiracy. Shelley, the investigator, arranged a discreet meeting with Erica, telling her only that she was working on a case involving someone Erica knew. What happened next stunned even Shelley. Erica had no idea Mark was married. She had never met Hannah, never been told about her. She believed Mark's stories, that he lived with a possessive sister, that he was recovering from a physical injury, and that his limited mobility was temporary. She was genuinely shocked to learn that he was permanently disabled. She was more shocked to find out she was named as a beneficiary on a life insurance policy for a woman she had never even heard of. Her cooperation shifted everything. She turned over her phone, provided message logs, and even agreed to testify if necessary. With Erica's statement in hand, the police executed a search warrant on the house. Hannah made sure to be at work when they arrived, not wanting to be present for the arrest. Mark was caught completely off guard. Investigators seized his devices, financial documents, and the drawer full of prepaid phones. He was arrested on the spot for identity theft, insurance fraud, and wire fraud. More charges were expected to follow pending the review of his financial activity and communications with the other women. Word spread quickly. The quiet neighborhood that had once admired the couple for their strength and resilience now whispered about secrets, lies, and betrayal. Local news stations picked up the story, dubbing it the wheelchair conman case. Mark was held without bail pending trial, due to concerns about witness tampering and evidence destruction. Hannah didn't attend the first hearing. Instead, she met with her lawyer to finalize the divorce and have Mark's access to their financial accounts permanently revoked. She had the locks changed on the house and donated most of his belongings to charity. Every trace of him, every remnant of their shared life was removed piece by piece. It was painful but necessary. She wasn't rebuilding her life. She was reclaiming it. Later, Shelley called with one final discovery. Mark had been researching poisons online. Nothing concrete, Nothing actionable yet, but searches about untraceable medications and inducing sleep unnoticed showed up in his browser history just weeks before the fake insurance policy was filed. Hannah listened in silence. She didn't want to know what could have happened. She was only grateful that it didn't. What began as a tragic accident and a wife's unwavering devotion had spiraled into deceit, manipulation, and near dangerous intent. But Hannah was no longer the quiet caregiver. She had faced the truth, stood her ground, and exposed the man behind the mask. And in doing so, she had saved herself from a fate she hadn't even known was being written for her. The courtroom was packed. Curious townspeople, local reporters, and even a few former colleagues of Mark's had shown up to witness the trial. The once respected high school teacher, known for his calm demeanor and sharp mind, now sat at the defense table in a plain suit, his wheelchair positioned stiffly before the judge. He didn't look at Hannah once. She sat in the back row, flanked by her attorney and Shelley, the investigator who had helped piece everything together. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her face calm but pale. It had taken everything in her to come here. The trial unfolded over several days. Prosecutors presented a well-organized narrative that stunned even those who thought they knew the whole story. They showed how Mark had created multiple identities, manipulated women online, and fabricated entire backstories to extract money and attention. He had crafted digital trails, set up fake business proposals, and sent gifts using stolen funds. But the most damning piece of evidence was the life insurance policy in Hannah's name, forged and filed without her knowledge, with Erica listed as the sole beneficiary. Erica testified under oath. She explained how she met Mark online, how he had charmed her, and how she had no idea he was married or paralyzed. She appeared genuinely shaken, her voice trembling as she read aloud some of the messages he had sent her. She admitted she had fallen for him, trusted him, and believed every lie he told. When she learned the truth, she said, it felt like waking up in someone else's nightmare. The prosecution didn't have to work hard to convince the jury. The mountain of digital evidence, combined with Mark's financial records and Erica's testimony, painted a clear picture. The defense tried to argue that Mark's behavior stemmed from trauma caused by his accident, suggesting he had suffered psychological damage and was acting out of desperation and loneliness. But the timeline, planning, and sophistication of his scheme told a different story. This wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. Mark was found guilty on multiple counts, including identity theft, wire fraud, and forgery. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 8. As the sentence was read, he remained expressionless. He gave no apology, offered no explanation. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, he declined. It was as if the man who had spun a web of lies for years had finally run out of words. After the trial, Hannah didn't speak to the press. She left quietly through a side exit, her attorney guiding her past the cluster of reporters outside. The cameras tried to catch a glimpse of her face, but she kept her head down. She wasn't interested in becoming a public figure or a symbol. She had been a caregiver, a wife, a victim, and a survivor. Now she just wanted to be free. In the weeks that followed, she packed up the house and sold it. The memories there had once been warm and full of love, but they had become heavy shadows she couldn't shake. The ramp at the front door, the handrails in the bathroom, the modified kitchen, all of it was a reminder of what she had sacrificed, and how deeply she had been betrayed. She donated most of the furniture and took only what she needed. She moved to a small rental near the coast where no one knew her name. She returned to nursing, this time working in hospice care. The patients were different than those she had helped before, but the work gave her purpose. It reminded her that not everyone who is weak is a liar, and not everyone who suffers loses their soul. She found comfort in caring for those at the end of life, people who had no more lies left to tell, only truths they were finally ready to share. Occasionally, she would hear from someone in her old neighborhood, a text message here, a holiday card there. Most people were kind, expressing disbelief at what had happened and admiration for her strength. But Hannah didn't need admiration. She needed peace. She spent her evenings walking along the shoreline, listening to the waves crash and letting the salt air clear her mind. Slowly, the tension in her shoulders began to ease. Mark never reached out. There were no letters from prison, no attempts at reconciliation. Whether out of shame or bitterness, he disappeared completely from her life. In some ways, that silence was the greatest mercy he had ever given her. He remained locked away, physically and emotionally, while she moved forward. Hannah never remarried. She didn't see the need to rebuild the kind of life she had once imagined. Instead, she found contentment in small things: sunrises over the ocean, the kindness of strangers, the quiet hum of a life lived honestly. She adopted a dog from a shelter and named him Leo. He became her shadow, her companion, her anchor. It lived quietly in the corners of her mind, a reminder of how quickly trust can be broken and how deeply someone can deceive you. But it also reminded her of her strength, of the moment she chose to stop being silent and start protecting herself. And that choice, in the end, saved her life.